as my predecessors have mentioned, none of the sports organizations are able to articulate the value that they have, and they don't present themselves as an asset that someone should invest in. I think the most recent example is the situation we have now at the Football Kenya Federation, where we have the league yet to begin, and we have some clubs who are in and some clubs who are out. So it shows you the helplessness of the situation, where the clubs, despite having a different opinion from the federation, are unable to actually do anything about what the federation decides.
Absolutely. Mr. Minor, to you, it's a question that we had touched on slightly earlier. We're hoping as a corporate in this, you would be able to enlighten us. What makes a team or a sport attractive? We keep talking about return on investment, the ROI. Where do you come in as a sponsor on that in terms of what you look out for?
Thank you so much. I think a lot of the valid points have been mentioned by my colleagues with regard to what every corporate organization will be looking forward to. There's the building of the value, and I think one of the biggest challenges it stems from a very valid point that was mentioned from the investment side, that the get-go from which a lot of sports association, and a very valid point of what Yvonne has said. From the get-go, when they are setting up those institutions, they are not prepped up for projecting value. So even within the course of their activities, it becomes very, very hard for them to structure value. And we did mention the simple example of where someone sets it up as a personal enterprise. So in the long run, this person is not looking towards decisions that are broad-based. They are very, very internally focused. The second challenge that I think over time affects this process, and I think it came up when we were discussing when the question that was raised about the players' contracts, is that long-term view of the whole activity and how well prepared are clubs to achieve a long-term view. Mr. Shikanda and Mr. Koril mentioned correctly that you're struggling with objectives of this year. So you make decisions for this year, and in essence, your club is structured for this year. Whereas a corporate wants to see how they'll be able to interact with their club in the long run, how they'll be able to see value beyond that. I think the third issue is the mentality that exists within our sporting sector. And Chairman Shikanda will tell you that challenge of the players and how they behave is a key determinant of how in return the corporates will behave. So what that ends up having is that whereas in an ideal situation, everyone would want to act very professional, where we say, if as a player I give you a contract, you will adhere to your contract. And in return, as a club, I will adhere to your contract. But when a player, when Majani takes a club to court, the players seemed as really agitating for their rights, and they are seen in a very positive light. And I think that challenge is honesty. We must all agree that there is a huge challenge with honesty in our sporting structure. There are a lot of people who are in the sport for the wrong reasons, and it's a typical case of that one bad potato that sometimes messes it up for everyone else, because once bitten, twice shy. If corporates have invested a certain money in a certain club and they get awareness about improper use of the finances, they will definitely grow back.
Right, well noted. Looking at, Yvonne, the sustainable growth of sports in the country vis-a-vis continentally, what are some of the commercial strategies that we can look at realistically?
I think a few other people have mentioned this. There is a need to diversify the avenues of revenue generation. So as we're looking at football clubs or football organizations, there is a need to go back to the core of it all. At the core is what we call the technical cycle. There's a tool that I like using that shows the relationship between the technical side of the game and the commercial side of the game. Before you get to revenues, because most clubs I interact with, everybody tells you, my problem is money. So then you ask, okay, what were your projections for this season, you know? Everybody has a money projection, but nobody has the technical backing to back the money that you're asking. Because if you look at how assets are valued within the football context, starting right from the player, it is determined by what investment went in building that player. When we break it down, you will see that at every phase of the player development pathway, there's a certain investment that comes with every stage of that player. By that time, that player comes to play in the Premier League, then you can trace back and see how much was put in to make that player. And that is how people argue even the value of players. So in our Kenyan context, sometimes we're not able to trace some of these people. If you go down to primary school games or even secondary, especially secondary school games, there's a lot of talent during that period. But there's a break in between this player at secondary school level by the time they join a tertiary institution and by the time they get to the Premier League. You will notice that within the Kenyan context, our league is one of the very few leagues in the world that does not require or mandate teams participating to have developmental sides. If you look at the general outlook for football organization, you will see that the player development pathway is complemented by every club. For you to put value into that one player, you should be able to trace how far this player has come. In Kenya, you look at the Mathare structure, which is the closest we come to best practice within the valuation of a football organization. So the commercial side of the game cannot exist if the technical side has not been complemented. We want organizations, for people like me, to put commercial strategies that are going to make the club sustainable. Then it has to be informed by a technical target, so that you tell me, we want to send a team to the under-17 championship, to the under-13 championship, and this is the investment required to actually have such a program. So that the value that I'm putting there when I come to corporates to talk to them about it, and even when I'm sourcing and applying for grants, I'm able to say the target demographic that will be targeted in that sponsorship or in that partnership or in that project grant. So your sport should speak to a certain objective that they have in the target market that they're looking to promote their product.
Fair enough, definitely. It's about longevity. It's about having that foresight, you know, to be able to look ahead and be able to capitalize. Before I get to you, Moses, you know, just thinking about what Yvonne has said, long-term strategies to do with football. Allow me to deviate and give you a quick story. A Nigerian player, his name is Victor Osimhen. I'm sure a majority of you are familiar with him. Victor Osimhen actually became the most expensive Nigerian to ever be sold, ever, you know, and we're talking about a club with the likes of Igalo to Manchester United, with the likes of J.J. Okocha back in the day, and as much as those were very different times commercially. Victor Osimhen's club, even from back in the day in Nigeria, when they didn't know he was going to go to Napoli, when they didn't know how big he was going to become, Victor Osimhen's club in Nigeria actually has a clause in the contract whereby they will be able to make money from him, from his sales, up until he hits the age of 25. Whether that is even at 3.5% of 80 million euros, you can imagine how big of an amount that is, and especially for local clubs. I think in line with what Yvonne is saying, those are some of the long-term strategies, the foresight, you know, when someone is able to invest in someone and they didn't know about how big they'd become. Your thoughts on, you know, just the growth and sustainability of sports and its development as we move ahead, Moses?
Thank you so much. I think she's mentioned a very, very valid point, which borrows to what the speaker from Sekafa mentioned. What is the overriding architecture within which we are working in? What is the philosophy that guides the sport within which everyone is going to plug in? Because if, for example, there is no and I think, as was mentioned, and it's usually also, if you look at football, if you were to compare the British model and the American model of football, where one is structured towards professional sports, another one is structured towards, that growth of the game at the lower levels. What happens is that individuals who are players in those ecosystems play to fit into the existing architecture, so that if you know you are playing in the British system, it's a commercial system, so you know the money is most likely going to be in the higher leagues, and equally it's the clubs that are meant maybe to do more of investment in the growth of the younger players. If it's in the American system, the league is almost like an independent entity, so a lot of the resources goes into the younger players. So at the moment, I think it is important for us to expand this conversation towards creating our national architecture of the sport. So that when City Stars is building a team, they know within what is their role in that architecture. The funding, the people in the funding, the people in marketing, the people in the building of the infrastructure, and that is how we'll also be able to develop the aspect of the technical, because as she said, our technical aspect is also very, very dispersed. We have thousands and thousands of academies. God knows what they train in those academies. There is no football philosophy that we know will feed into our national team, so that we say our players play maybe in a certain formation, a certain ethos, there's nothing that informs the progressive growth of our football.
As we wind up the conversation to do with sponsorship in sports and the trends that we're noticing, Yvonne, your final thoughts before I get to Moses.
My parting shot would be an encouragement to all the football organizations in Kenya to get the strategy right. Do not underestimate the power of having a document that guides your organization, because most people always are in a hurry to bring the money in, and there is a reason why year in, year out we're dealing with scandals within sports. First, you have to recognize that as a nation, we do not have sufficient local law to protect the sports organizations. At least at the moment, we're on a transitional phase where that, I think, should be made right. So you have to recognize the fact that the leadership that we have always ends up doing what they individually think is right because of lack of that guiding document that will sort of enable even the members within our organizations hold the leaders accountable of some of the decisions that they're going to make. Because right now, we have 3 European clubs in our portfolio. We're working with Juventus, Sevilla, and Inter Milan for their strategy for East Africa. These are clubs who don't even need the East African market, but because they have a global strategy, then there is need to customize strategies for each region, and there's a CECAFA region strategy to that point. So for you to get to a point where you will have some sort of relevance, then there's a need for you to actually plan for it so that every effort is deliberate. We are still very far from going fully professional in our football. So right now, most people within the football organizations are volunteers, but there is a way that with a proper strategy, you can even make use of that passion of the people who volunteer to help you time and again. You will make their effort worthwhile towards building a brand that will be sustainable enough for you to employ the most appropriate structures for the day-to-day running of the clubs.
I think for me, it's a call to everyone to start doing what is right from their point of action. About, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, we once sat with 4D and Pamzo and TJ, and we were just having a conversation. And I think speaking also to the legends of this game really gives me perspective from way back about where the sport has come from and where it's going. I think from the onset, everyone must start taking an individual commitment to do what is right from their point, because we cannot demand accountability at higher levels when we are doing the wrong thing at whichever level we are. So as club owners, as players, as sponsors, as whoever is playing in that space, let's ensure we do the small things right, and we create a snowball effect of accountability that will also transform what our sport is. Because my constant pain is a player who entertains you on that field, and we all cheer for them. And I think there's something I say consistently, and we all cheer for them. But those cheers will never put food on their table at home. So for our players to understand what has value. And I think there's a huge task on KEFWA's desk with regard to also how the mentality of our players, because I also believe a player who is also well structured mentally, if I use that term, is also going to be a key player in terms of enhancing professionalism, because they will not be taken for a ride. They will also demand accountability. They will do things in the right way. And it becomes easier for you to do some of those small things that we are saying. Because Dan will tell you, he has players who have an ability to create a wave on social media. But he will tell you that for you to tell a player, please post 3 posts on Facebook weekly. That's simple. And they will not do it. And it's not that they don't have the bundles. So when our players start appreciating those small things, it creates a snowball effect. The club has a voice, the club has a following, the club has revenue, and over time they get to see their role in club. Not as someone waits for the treasurer, he's always looking out for where the treasurer is, but they are contributing to the well-being of that club. Because that is, we transform our players from beggars to stakeholders in our football institution, because also in return, they know that we, the officials, are doing the right thing. We're also not cutting corners and cutting deals that are to the detriment of their welfare. We create that ecosystem of honesty and proper performance of activities. And that will also develop confidence in anyone out there who will say that if I work with this club, things are done in the right way, and therefore focusing on the future.
The sponsor or the corporate that you're going to talk to does not care so much for the football the way you do. They care about meeting their marketing objectives. So most sports organizations, most football organizations go to sponsors and corporates with the same narrative. I'm giving you an opportunity to advertise. But you see, the argument there for that marketing manager is that I can pay for advertisement, you know. I can afford to pay for advertisement. I can afford to run promotions, countrywide promotions, and not get involved with the wrangles. FIFA, despite being the global governing body that attracts the highest revenues in sports, has the highest number of wrangles and even the worst scandals, but still attracts the same. You have to package yourself. I will repeat these every single time somebody asks me. The way you present yourself helps in making the decision to the other party. Yeah? So, like, for instance, moving out of sports, in our day-to-day life, how you dress says a lot about you. In our day-to-day life, most people tend to treat you depending on your title, you know. That is why people have they get a lot of prestigiousness in having fancy titles. Some people get offended by virtue of you not addressing them by their title. So you have to remember that as you are presenting yourself as a football organization, think about it as a presentation. You're going for a date. You're trying to get somebody to get interested in you. So the way you show up to the date will determine, first of all, where you'll be taken for the date, how much money you'll be spent on. Yeah? There are things, you're laughing, but it's very much true. Yeah? It is very true. So in your day-to-day practices, similarly, it's the same way you present yourself as a football organization. Yeah? Unfortunately, I'll make reference to one of our earlier speakers. Anyone who walked into the room during the presentation of Mr. Auka Gesheo would never know that there's the Secretary General of SECAFA. Why? Everything there had everything to do about everyone else apart from SECAFA. So everyone, I don't know about you, but I was asking myself all through, who is this again? You know, it felt like more a conversation in a bar than a football finance summit. Are you getting my point? So when we are talking about culture, at the core of the commercial sustainability of an organization is what it represents. What do you stand for? As you're presenting yourself as a football club, what do you stand for? Because in defining that, then you're able to get someone else to see the synergy points and know what they're getting involved in. Some of these long-standing rivalries that we have within our local football cannot be commercialized because we do not own them when we present our football organizations. Yeah? There's a classic example that I usually use is that Gor Mahia and AFC will argue and even beat anyone who says that they're not the biggest clubs in football. The same Gor Mahia doesn't want to hear anything to do with you telling them that they cannot be the biggest football club in Kenya because they don't pay attention to the assets. Apart from bragging rights of winning the title, they do not have anything else that can make you set their value. Same to Dan Shikanda's AFC Leopards. So apart from, but what happens to vehicles? Are vehicles classified as assets or liabilities? Exactly. It loses the value immediately it leaves the showroom. That is my point. Yeah. So when you look at how you value the club, the best example that we can borrow from, especially us here in Kenya, is our brothers in Egypt. The culture aspect of supporting the biggest club and the most successful club, Al Ahly, includes that support system. If you break it down, one player, let's say the smallest family has 4 people. If one player can let the 3 other people within their family know about their game, then it means that we already have how many people? We have 3 more fans coming in. If your first team has contracted 40 or so people, then it means you're having 40 times 3 as fans on the stand. So it starts from there. Are we proud of what we represent as a football club or as a football organization? Are we proud of that? Can we articulate that? It starts from there, and then you build it from there, and you'll realize that you can be sustainable and successful in every aspect.
All right, Moses, to you as we wind up, your final thoughts on that as well.
I think she has very aptly captured what the issue is. And I think maybe just for the sake of chairman, my boss usually tells me that you adopt what we call the Thegadfly mentality. You don't give up, you persist. So you have to combine your ability to incrementally grow the value with consistency, because I think sometimes sometimes the challenge becomes, and I think what she mentioned, you don't go and present what you want to do. You present what you are already doing. So it's what we all call the proof of concept, that we are doing this. So for us to do much more, this is the gap that they are presenting. Someone actually once told me, most of us in football, we present Woishe stories and dreams, and that's what we want to be funded. No one will fund Woishe stories, and no one will fund dreams. People want to fund value.
So it's about professionalism, it's about proactivity as the players, going out of your way to do what you need to do to build your brand, and it's also about longevity and thinking ahead and taking ownership. Not just waiting for chairman, not just waiting for president, but what can I do to improve my own situation? Ladies and gentlemen, that pretty much wraps it up in terms of our panel debate on sponsorship and trends, as well as approaching the final few minutes of our Tisini Football Finance Summit.